For thousands of years, Zen Buddhism has offered a pathway to inner peace that does not require complexity or struggle. Tonight, we will explore this ancient wisdom through stories that have brought peace to people across generations. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. What makes these teachings powerful is their simplicity. The Buddhist path teaches us that peace is not something we must create or achieve. It is something we uncover. As you listen tonight, there is nothing to force or figure out. These stories work best when received with a relaxed, open mind. This wisdom cannot be grasped through effort alone. All you need to do is listen. Let the words find their way to wherever they need to go within you. Allow your body to settle now. Notice the surface beneath you supporting your weight. Feel your breathing. Find its natural rhythm, slower and deeper with each moment. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath. And let's begin our journey together. On a hilltop where ancient pines grew thick and the air smelled of cedar and earth, there stood a monastery called Seiyun-ji. It was small, housing perhaps a dozen monks, built of dark wood that had weathered many seasons. The buildings were solid but worn. The garden was tended but simple. It was a quiet place, a place of steady practice, but not a place that drew attention or inspired awe. A monk named Taichi lived there, and he had for many years. He was in his middle years, neither young nor old, with a face that held both seriousness and kindness. His days followed the rhythm of monastic life. Morning meditation before dawn. Work in the garden or copying sutras. Afternoon teaching for the few local students who came to learn. Evening prayers as the sun set behind the mountains. It was a good life. A life of practice and service. But lately, Taichi had been feeling something stirring within him. Not dissatisfaction exactly, but a sense that the monastery could offer something more. That it could be a place not just of quiet practice, but of real transformation. A place that drew people who were searching, who were lost, who needed what the teachings could provide. He did not speak of this feeling to the other monks. It seemed too large, too ambitious for a place as modest as theirs. Who were they to think they could become a beacon for seekers? They were just ordinary monks doing ordinary practice in an ordinary place. But the feeling persisted. One autumn night, Taichi could not sleep. He rose from his mat and walked outside, wrapping his robe against the cool air. The sky was clear, stars scattered thick across the darkness. He walked through the garden to a place where the ground opened to a view of the valley below. Lights from distant villages flickered like earthbound stars. He stood there, breathing the night air, feeling the stillness that comes in the hours when most people sleep. And as he watched the sky, a streak of light appeared. A shooting star, brilliant and brief, drawing a line of fire across the darkness before vanishing. Taichi's breath caught. In that moment, something crystallized in him. The vague feeling that had been stirring became clear intention. He closed his eyes and spoke silently to himself, to the universe, to whatever forces shape the unfolding of things. Let this place become a light for those in darkness. Let Seiyun-ji be a refuge for lost souls, a place where true wisdom can be found and shared. Let us be worthy of those who need what we can offer. It was not a prayer exactly, not a wish made to some external power. It was a commitment, a declaration of intention. And with that declaration, something shifted in Taichi. He opened his eyes, and the world looked different. Clearer, somehow. Full of possibility. The next morning, he began. He did not announce his intention to the other monks or tell them about the shooting star. Instead, he simply started working. He cleaned the meditation hall with extra care, not just sweeping but polishing the wooden floors until they gleamed. He tended the garden with new attention, removing dead growth, encouraging new plantings, creating spaces of beauty that invited contemplation. He began teaching differently too. Before, his instruction had been careful and traditional. Now, something more alive moved through him, and he spoke from deeper understanding, connecting the ancient teachings to the actual struggles people faced in their lives. Students who had been coming out of habit began to lean forward, to ask more questions, to return with friends. The other monks noticed these changes. Some were curious. Others were puzzled. What had gotten into Tai Chi? He seemed possessed by new energy, new purpose. One evening, the abbot, an elderly monk named Gensan, asked Tai Chi to take tea with him. They sat in the abbot's simple room, cups of green tea steaming between them. "You have changed," Gensan said. Not a criticism, just an observation. Tai Chi nodded. "I saw a shooting star some weeks ago. And in that moment, I understood what this place could become. What we could offer if we fully committed to it." "And what is that?" "A true refuge. A place of transformation. Not just for us, but for anyone who needs what the teachings can provide." Gensan was quiet for a long moment, sipping his tea. Then he smiled. "I have been waiting for someone to see this. For years, I have known this place could be more. But I am old. It needed younger energy, clearer vision. Tell me what you need." And so Tai Chi told him, not just about cleaning and teaching, but about a larger vision, making the monastery more welcoming, creating space for guests to stay and practice, offering teachings not just to local students, but to anyone who came seeking, building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. Gensan listened to all of it, nodding. When Tai Chi finished, the old abbot said, "A shooting star does not grant wishes, but it can awaken what is already within us, waiting to be activated. Your wish is good. Now comes the work of making it real." The work was considerable. Tai Chi organized the other monks, delegating tasks according to each person's skills and interests. Some focused on physical improvements to the buildings. Others worked on developing new teaching materials. Still others reached out to nearby communities, letting people know that Seiyunji was becoming a place of welcome, a place where anyone could come to learn and practice. Months passed. Then a year. The changes were gradual but accumulating. The monastery grounds became more beautiful, more inviting. The quality of teaching deepened. Word began to spread about this place in the mountains where genuine practice was happening, where people felt met and understood. Seekers began to arrive. At first a few, then more. People who had been searching for something they could not name but recognized when they found it. They would stay for days or weeks, participating in the daily rhythm of practice, sitting in meditation, working alongside the monks, slowly finding whatever it was they had come seeking. Each person who came and was helped became part of the monastery's growing presence. They returned to their communities changed, and others noticed. The light that Tai Chi had wished for was beginning to shine not through grand gestures, but through genuine transformation in individual lives. 2 years after the shooting star, Seunji was barely recognizable as the quiet, modest place it had been. The buildings were the same, but everything felt different. More alive, more purposeful. The monks moved with a sense of meaningful service. The grounds held an atmosphere of welcome and possibility. Tai Chi stood one evening in the same spot where he had seen the shooting star. He was tired from a long day of teaching and work, but it was a good tiredness. The kind that comes from effort aligned with purpose. A young monk named Sato approached him. "Master Tai Chi, people are calling Seunji the Star Monastery now. They say it shines light into the darkness of the world. How did you make this happen?" Tai Chi smiled. "I did not make it happen. I saw what was possible and then worked to align my actions with that vision. The wish was important. It clarified my intention. But intention without action is just a dream. It was the daily work, the sustained effort, the commitment to the vision even when progress seemed slow that made the difference." "But how did you know it would work?" Sato asked. "I did not know. I believed, and then I acted on that belief consistently. That is all. The universe responds to sustained intention, backed by aligned action. Not always in the ways we expect, and not always on our timeline. But it responds. The shooting star had been gone in seconds. But what it awakened in Tai Chi continued to unfold, to grow, to create ripples that spread far beyond what he could have imagined that night when he stood under the stars and made his silent commitment. This story reveals something essential about how wishes, intentions, and manifestation work in Buddhist understanding. A wish alone changes nothing. It is just a thought, a desire floating in consciousness. But a wish that awakens commitment, that mobilizes action, that aligns your daily choices with your deeper purpose, that is something different. That is a force that can reshape reality. Tai Chi did not wait for magic to happen. He did not expect the shooting star to grant his wish like some cosmic vending machine. He understood that the moment of wishing was the moment of choice. The moment he decided that this vision mattered enough to work toward it consistently, even when results were not immediately visible. Buddhist practice teaches that mind and reality are connected in ways that go deeper than we usually recognize. Not that reality is an illusion we can reshape with thought alone, but that our persistent patterns of thinking and acting create momentum that influences how our lives unfold. When you hold an intention clearly and back it with consistent action, you create a kind of gravitational field that draws circumstances, people, and opportunities into alignment with that intention. Tai Chi transformed the monastery not through supernatural power, but through the natural power of sustained commitment. Each day, he did what was in front of him. Teaching with more presence, cleaning with more care, inviting with more openness. None of these actions were dramatic, but accumulated over time, they created massive change. This is the teaching the shooting star awakened. That transformation happens through the compounding of small choices made in alignment with clear intention. That wishes matter not because they magically alter reality, but because they can awaken and focus the tremendous creative power that lives within each person. When you make a commitment to something that matters deeply, something in you changes. You move through life differently, see differently, respond differently. And those differences, though subtle at first, accumulate into transformation. In the far north, where winter came early and stayed late, where snow covered the high peaks year-round and the air was thin and sharp, there rose a mountain that dominated the landscape. The people who lived in its shadow called it Kazeyama, Wind Mountain, for the fierce winds that scoured its upper slopes. For generations, the peak had been considered unreachable. Many had tried. None had succeeded. The mountain was too steep, too exposed, too defended by weather and altitude. Stories were told of strong climbers who had attempted it and returned defeated, or worse, did not return at all. Over time, the mountain became more myth than geography. A symbol of the impossible. A reminder of human limitation. In a monastery at the base of Kazeyama lived a monk named Yuki. She was strong and quiet, known for her endurance in long meditation sessions and her skill in the physical work of monastic life. She had lived in the shadow of Kazeyama for 5 years, and every day she saw the peak, white and distant, untouched. Something about that untouched summit called to her. Not because she wanted to conquer it or prove herself, but because the mountain's impossibility felt like a question the universe was asking. Are you willing to attempt what seems beyond reach? Are you willing to fail in pursuit of something that matters? She began preparing. Not announcing her intention, just quietly building strength and learning what she could about the mountain. She studied the accounts of previous attempts. She trained her body, climbing smaller peaks nearby, learning to read weather, to move efficiently on steep terrain, to manage the thin air of altitude. The other monks noticed her training but said nothing. Yuki had always been someone who kept her own counsel. If she was preparing for something, she would reveal it when the time was right. A year into her preparation, during the spring when the weather was most stable, Yuki announced her intention. She would attempt Kazeyama. The response was immediate and unanimous. The other monks tried to dissuade her. The mountain had never been climbed. Attempting it was foolish, dangerous, potentially fatal. Why risk her life for something impossible? But Yuki was unmoved. "I understand the risk," she said calmly. "I have prepared as well as I can. But I will not live my whole life looking at that peak and wondering if it could be reached. I would rather try and fail than never try at all." The abbot, a man who had known Yuki since she first arrived at the monastery, studied her face. He saw determination, but also clarity. This was not recklessness. This was considered choice made with full awareness. "Then go with our blessing," he said, "and return to us safely." Yuki set out 3 days later. She carried minimal supplies. Food for several days. Water. Rope. Simple tools for the climb. Everything she needed and nothing she did not. The lower slopes were manageable, steep, but with good footing. She climbed steadily, her breathing controlled, her mind calm. By evening of the first day, she had reached the tree line, where vegetation gave way to bare rock and ice. She made camp in a protected spot, ate a simple meal, and slept as the wind sang above her. The second day brought her into the realm of the mountain proper. Here, the slopes steepened dramatically. Every step required attention. The air grew thinner, each breath delivering less oxygen. Her progress slowed. But she continued, moving with care, testing each handhold, each foothold, before committing her weight. By midday, she reached a cliff face that required actual climbing. She studied it for a long time, tracing possible routes with her eyes. Then she began, fingers finding small edges, feet pressing into tiny ledges, moving upward inch by inch, her entire being focused on this single task. This exact movement, this precise placement of hand and foot. The climb up the cliff face took hours. When she finally pulled herself over the top, her arms were shaking with fatigue. But she was through. She had passed what had turned back many previous climbers. She made camp again, this time with less protection from the wind. It howled through the night, shaking her small shelter. She slept fitfully, waking often to check that everything was secure. The third day, she entered the summit zone. Here, the mountain showed its true nature. The wind was a physical force, strong enough to knock her off balance if she was not careful. The cold bit through her layers. The altitude made every movement an effort. Her body screamed at her to stop, to turn back, to descend to where breathing was easier and warmth was possible. But Yuki kept moving. Not through denial of the difficulty, but through acceptance of it. Yes, this is hard. Yes, my body hurts. Yes, I am afraid. And still, I continue. This is what is required. This is what I chose. She thought about the monastery below, about her fellow monks who believed she was attempting the impossible. She thought about all the people who had looked at this mountain and decided it could not be done. She understood their reasoning. The mountain was objectively difficult, objectively dangerous. But impossible? That was an interpretation, not a fact. Late in the afternoon of the third day, after hours of the slowest, most careful climbing of her life, Yuki took a final step onto level ground. She looked around, confused for a moment. There was nowhere left to go up. She had reached the summit. The wind was fierce, tearing at her clothes, making it hard to stand. The view was vast. Mountains and valleys spreading in all directions, the monastery far below looking like a toy. But she did not stay long to admire it. The summit was not a place to linger. She marked it with a small cairn of stones, a simple gesture to show she had been there, and began the descent. The descent was in some ways harder than the climb. Fatigue was deeper. Attention had to be maintained, despite exhaustion. But she moved carefully, retracing her route, and by the evening of the fourth day, she was below the tree line again. By midday of the fifth day, she walked through the monastery gates. The monks who saw her return stopped what they were doing. News spread quickly. Yuki had returned. And as they gathered around her, asking if she had truly reached the summit, she simply nodded. I reached it. The mountain can be climbed. The news spread beyond the monastery, through the villages, into the wider region. Kazeyama, the impossible mountain, had been climbed. The myth of its unreachability was shattered. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Other people began attempting the mountain. Not recklessly, but thoughtfully, using Yuki's route, learning from her experience. Some succeeded. Some turned back. But the mountain was no longer impossible. It was simply difficult. Yuki herself was changed by the climb. Not outwardly, she remained the same quiet, strong presence she had always been. But inwardly, something had settled. She had asked the question the mountain posed and received her answer. Yes, she was willing to attempt the impossible. Yes, she could persist through difficulty. Yes, she had resources within her she had not fully known before. A young monk approached her one day in the garden. "Master Yuki, how did you climb the mountain?" What was the secret? Yuki pulled a weed from between the vegetables, her hands dark with soil. There was no secret. I decided the summit was possible. Then I took the first step. Then the next step. I kept taking steps until there were no more steps to take. That is all. But you could have died. Were you not afraid? I was afraid, Yuki said simply. Fear was there the entire climb. But I did not let fear make the decision. I acknowledged it, respected the real dangers it pointed to, and continued anyway. Fear is not wrong. It is information. But it is not the only information. She stood, brushing soil from her hands. The mountain taught me that impossible is often just untested. That we limit ourselves not by our actual capacity, but by our beliefs about our capacity. And that the greatest barriers we face are frequently the ones we construct in our own minds. The story of Yuki and Kazeyama speaks to something profound about human potential and the nature of limitations. Many of the boundaries we experience are not external facts, but internal beliefs. We decide something is impossible, and that decision shapes our reality more powerfully than the objective difficulty of the thing itself. Yuki did not deny the mountain's difficulty. She prepared carefully. She respected the real dangers. But she did not accept that it was impossible simply because it had not been done before. She distinguished between actual impossibility and untested difficulty. And in that distinction lies freedom. Buddhist teaching points to how much of our experience is shaped by mind. Not that external reality does not exist, but that our interpretation of reality creates the world we actually live in. Two people can face the same challenge and experience it completely differently based on the stories they tell about it. One person's impossible is another person's difficult but doable. Yuki's climb changed not just her own understanding, but the understanding of everyone who heard about it. The mountain did not change. It was exactly as steep, as high, as dangerous as it had always been. But once someone climbed it, everyone's relationship with it transformed. The impossible became difficult. The unreachable became distant, but reachable. This is the power of what Buddhism calls right view. Seeing clearly what is actually true rather than what we assume to be true. Assumptions limit us. Clear seeing reveals possibility. When you examine your own life, how many impossibilities are actually untested assumptions? How many limitations are inherited beliefs rather than actual boundaries? Yuki's perseverance through difficulty is also instructive. She did not climb in a state of constant enthusiasm. She climbed through fatigue, pain, fear, doubt. But she did not let those experiences stop her. She acknowledged them and continued. This is different from denying difficulty or pretending it does not hurt. It is meeting difficulty with clear awareness and choosing to persist anyway. The Buddha taught about right effort. Not forcing, not grasping, but steady, appropriate application of energy toward what matters. Yuki embodied this. She did not attack the mountain with aggression. She climbed it with care, with respect, with sustained attention. And that quality of effort neither too loose nor too tight, made possible what seemed impossible. Each of us has mountains we look at and assume are unreachable. Dreams we have decided are too large. Changes we believe are too difficult. But what if those assessments are more about our current beliefs than about actual reality? What if, like Yuki, we simply began, took one step, then another, and continued taking steps until we discovered what was actually possible? The summit she reached was significant, but perhaps more significant was the internal summit she discovered. The understanding that her capacity was greater than she had known. That difficulty is not the same as impossibility. That fear can be acknowledged without being obeyed. These internal discoveries matter more than any external achievement. They change how you meet all of life, not just one mountain. In a remote region where mountains touched the clouds and meadows stretched wide under open sky, there lived a monk named Takeshi. His monastery sat on a hillside overlooking farmland and forest, and he was known for carrying a quality of lightness that seemed unshakable. Even in difficulty, even when others grew heavy with worry, Takeshi moved through life with steady calm. But that season tested everyone. The rains came early and refused to stop. Day after day, water fell from grey skies. The river that ran beside the village, usually gentle and clear, swelled beyond its banks. Fields flooded. Roads turned to thick mud. The villagers worked to save what they could, but the water kept rising, claiming more land each day. Takeshi watched all this from the monastery. He saw the strain on people's faces, heard the edge in their voices. The constant rain was wearing everyone down, creating a feeling that things would never improve, that hardship was simply the new reality. One morning, standing at the monastery gate, Takeshi made a decision. He would walk to the next valley, where another monastery housed monks he considered friends and teachers. The journey usually took half a day along the river path. But now, with the flooding, the path was underwater in places. The river itself had become something wild, dark with churned earth, moving fast and loud. He could have waited. That would have been the practical choice. But Takeshi understood something about hope, that sometimes you must move toward connection, toward light, especially when staying still feels safer. Hope is not passive. It requires action, even small action, to keep it alive. He packed simply. Some rice, a water flask, an extra robe. He told the other monks where he was going, and they looked at him with concern. The river was dangerous now. Perhaps he should wait until the waters calmed. But Takeshi smiled. "The river is the river," he said. "Whether calm or wild, it is still just water moving. I will respect it, but I will not let it stop me." He set out as morning light filtered weakly through the clouds. The path was muddy, but passable at first. He walked steadily, his bare feet finding purchase on the slick ground. Rain fell lightly, a fine mist more than a downpour. He noticed the green of the grass, intensified by all the water. Noticed small flowers still blooming, despite the flood. Life persisting. As he walked, his mind stayed present. He did not think ahead to difficulties he might face. Did not replay worries from the village. He was simply here, walking, breathing, placing one foot in front of the other. This is a practice in itself. Meeting what is here without adding mental weight to it. The path brought him closer to the river. Here, The flooding was worse. Water spread across land that was usually dry, creating a wide, shallow lake where the path used to be. Takeshi paused, assessing. The water looked to be knee-deep, maybe slightly more. The current was visible but not overwhelming in the shallows. He stepped in. The cold was immediate and shocking. He breathed through it, letting his body adjust. The bottom was soft mud. Each step required attention. He moved slowly, testing his footing before committing his weight. The water rose to mid-thigh, then higher as he moved toward where the actual river channel ran deeper. About halfway across the flooded section, something shifted. His foot found no bottom. The current, stronger than he had judged, pulled at him. For a moment, pure instinct took over. His body knew to keep moving, to not freeze. He pushed forward, half swimming, half walking, until his feet found mud again. He emerged on the far side, breathing hard. Water streamed from his robes, but he was across. He found a large rock and sat, catching his breath, letting his heart slow. He noticed he was smiling. In that moment of challenge, when the current pulled and the depth surprised him, fear could have taken hold. Panic could have made him thrash and struggle. But something else had been there instead. A kind of trust. Not in the river being safe, but in his own capacity to meet what came. This is what hope is built on. Not the belief that nothing difficult will happen, but the understanding that you can meet difficulty, that you have resources within you that respond when needed, that you are not as fragile as fear suggests. He continued walking. The rain intensified. His robes, just beginning to dry, were soaked again. The path grew steeper as it climbed away from the river, and his legs began to tire. He was no longer young. The body has its limits. But his mind remained light. He found himself thinking about the villagers, about their worry. He understood it. Rain is easier to bear when you know it will end. But when day after day brings more water, when the pattern seems endless, hope becomes difficult to hold. Yet Takeshi knew that all patterns end. All weather changes. The rain would stop eventually. It always did. And, in the meantime, life was still happening. The flowers still bloomed. The river still flowed. His feet still carried him forward. These facts remained true regardless of the difficulty. By midday, he reached the crest of the hill between valleys. Below, he could see the other monastery, its curved roof tiles dark with rain, smoke rising from the cooking fire. The sight filled him with warmth. He had made it. The journey that seemed daunting was complete. When he arrived at the gate, the monks there greeted him with surprise and concern. Why had he traveled in such weather? They brought him dry robes, hot tea, a seat by the fire. Takeshi accepted all this gratefully. But when they asked again why he had come, why he had not waited, his answer was simple. I needed to remind myself that difficult conditions do not make movement impossible. They make it harder, yes, but not impossible. And I needed to carry that reminder back to my own monastery, to my own village. One of the older monks, a woman named Shunko with grey hair and sharp eyes, nodded slowly. You came not for what we could teach you, but for what the journey itself would teach. Yes, Takeshi said. The river taught me. The rain taught me. My own tired legs taught me. All of it taught me that hope is not about waiting for conditions to improve. It is about moving through conditions as they are, trusting that movement itself creates possibility. He stayed 2 days at the monastery, resting, sharing meals and conversation. Then he made the return journey. The rain had lessened slightly, but the river was still high. He crossed the flooded sections with the same care and attention. And when he arrived back at his own monastery, something had shifted in him. Something clarified. That evening, he gathered the other monks and some of the villagers who had come for evening prayers. He told them about his journey, not to boast, but to share what he had learned. "The river tried to stop me," he said. "The rain made every step harder. My body grew tired. All of this is true. But I kept moving, and I am here. The journey that seemed impossible was simply difficult. And difficult is not the same as impossible." He paused, looking at the faces around him. Hope is not pretending hardship does not exist. Hope is knowing that you can move through hardship. That you have before, and you will again. That is all. That simple knowing. The rain continued for another week. But something in the village changed. People still worked to manage the flooding. Still felt tired from the constant wet and grey. But the heaviness lifted slightly. Because Takeshi's journey had shown them something. That movement was still possible. That connection was still possible. That hope was not about perfect conditions, but about trust in one's capacity to meet whatever comes. When the rain finally stopped and the sun broke through, turning the wet world into a landscape of glittering light, people felt not just relief, but something deeper. Gratitude. Not just for the sun, but for having moved through the rain without losing themselves to despair. This story speaks to the Buddhist understanding of hope and optimism. These are not naive beliefs that everything will always be fine. They are practices, ways of meeting life that acknowledge difficulty while not being consumed by it. Takeshi did not deny the danger of the swollen river. He respected it, moved carefully through it. But he did not let it define what was possible. This is the balance Buddhism teaches. Clear seeing of what is, combined with trust in your capacity to meet what is. Hope becomes difficult when we believe that our well-being depends on conditions being a certain way. When we tie our peace to the rain stopping, to the river calming, to circumstances aligning with our preferences. This creates fragility. Because conditions are always changing. Sometimes in our favor, often not. But when hope is rooted in something deeper, in the understanding that you can meet what comes, it becomes more stable. The river may be wild, but you can still cross it. The rain may continue, but you can still move through your days. This is not about forcing positivity or denying real difficulty. It is about knowing your own capacity. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes not just from difficult conditions, but from our relationship with those conditions, from the stories we tell about them, from the meaning we assign to them. When we interpret ongoing rain as a sign that things will never improve, we add mental suffering to physical challenge. But when we can hold difficulty as simply what is present right now, without making it mean something larger about the future or about ourselves, the suffering lessens. The difficulty remains, but we are not overwhelmed by it. Takeshi's journey was an act of practice. He did not need to go to the other monastery. He chose to go as a way of training his own mind, of proving to himself that movement was still possible. and in doing so, he created something that benefited not just himself, but his whole community. This is how hope works. It spreads. One person moving through difficulty with steady presence gives others permission to do the same. It shows that it can be done. And that showing matters more than 1,000 words of encouragement. In a town where stone streets wound between workshops and houses, where the smell of wood smoke mixed with the sweet scent of blooming trees, there lived a monk named Ren. He was not attached to any large monastery, but instead kept a small garden behind a modest dwelling at the edge of town. People knew him mostly for this garden, which seemed to thrive in ways that defied explanation. The region was known for its harsh growing conditions. The soil was rocky and poor. Summer brought intense heat and little rain. Winter winds could strip leaves from branches in a single night. Most people in town struggled to keep even hardy vegetables alive. Flower gardens were rare, considered impractical given the effort they required. But Ren's garden was different. It was small, barely larger than a room, enclosed by a low stone wall. Yet, within that space, life flourished. Roses climbed wooden trellises. Chrysanthemums nodded in the breeze, their petals perfect circles of white and gold. Herbs grew thick and fragrant. Even in the dead of winter, something was always blooming, some small flower holding color against the gray. The townspeople noticed, but did not understand. Some assumed Ren had special knowledge of plants. Others thought the soil in that particular spot must be unusually good. A few whispered that he used some kind of magic or blessing. The truth was simpler and more profound than any of these guesses. A young woman named May had recently moved to town. She was a potter, skilled with her hands, but her first season in this new place had been difficult. Her work was not selling well. She felt isolated, unsure of her place. And when she tried to plant a small herb garden outside her workshop, everything died within weeks despite her careful watering. She heard about Ren's garden and decided to see it for herself. Maybe he could offer advice about what she was doing wrong. She found him one morning kneeling beside a bed of late-blooming asters. He was an older man, his hair more grey than black, his hands deep in dark earth. He looked up as she approached and offered a slight bow of welcome. "Your garden is beautiful," May said. The words felt inadequate for what she was seeing. The space radiated something beyond just visual appeal. It felt alive in a way that made her want to sit and breathe and simply be. Ren wiped his hands on his simple robe and stood slowly. "You are kind to notice. Would you like to sit for a moment?" He gestured to a wooden bench beneath a plum tree. May settled onto it, and Ren sat beside her. They were quiet for a moment. She could hear birds in the branches. Feel the sun warm on her face. Smell the earth and flowers. "I tried to grow herbs," she said finally, "but everything died. I do not understand what I did wrong." "Tell me what you did," Ren said gently. May described her process. The watering schedule she followed. The fertilizer she used. How she placed the pots in the Sunday. It all sounded correct to her. Ren listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "When you looked at your herbs, what did you see?" The question confused her. "I saw herbs. Small plants in pots. Did you see them as they were? Or did you see them through worry that they might die?" May started to answer, then stopped. She realized he was right. Every time she looked at the herbs, she had been checking for signs of failure. Yellowing leaves, drooping stems, evidence that she was doing something wrong. She had not actually seen the plants. She had seen her fear about the plants. "My garden grows," Ren said, "not because I have secret knowledge or special soil. It grows because of how I hold it in my mind. When I look at a plant, I see it fully. I notice what it needs. I respond to what is actually happening, not to what I fear might happen." He gestured toward the bed of asters he had been tending. "These flowers face challenges. Insects come. Weather turns harsh. Soil loses nutrients. All of this happens. But I do not carry those challenges in my mind when they are not present. When an insect appears, I address it. When rain is needed, I water. But I do not spend my days worrying about insects that have not come and drought that has not happened." May listened, something opening in her understanding. "Your mind is like this garden," Ren continued. "What you plant in it will grow. If you plant worry, you will harvest worry. If you plant attention, presence, care for what is actually here, you will harvest something different." He stood and walked to a section of the garden where small seedlings were just beginning to emerge from the soil. "These are new plantings. Delicate. They may not all survive. But I do not treat them as if they are already dead. I give them what they need and trust their nature to respond." Over the following weeks, May returned to Ren's garden often. Not just to learn about plants, but to learn about mind. She would sit on the bench and watch him work. She noticed that he moved without hurry, that he seemed to enjoy each small task. Pulling weeds was not a chore to rush through, but an opportunity to be close to the earth, to notice which plants needed more space, to maintain the garden's health. She began to understand. The garden was not separate from Ren's mind. It was an expression of it. Every plant reflected his quality of attention. Every thriving flower showed what was possible when care was given without anxiety, when attention was present without fear. She started a new garden at her workshop. This time, she approached it differently. When she planted seeds, she did not immediately worry about whether they would sprout. She simply made sure the conditions were right and then let them be. When she watered, she paid attention to what each plant actually needed, not to a rigid schedule. When a plant struggled, she addressed that specific challenge without deciding it meant she was a failure at gardening. The change was subtle but real. Her plants began to grow. Not all of them, some still died. But the ones that lived grew strong and healthy. And she found that her anxiety lessened. Not just about the garden, but about other things too. Her pottery, her place in this new town, her life in general. One afternoon, several months after her first visit, May found Ren sitting on his bench. The garden was in full autumn glory, every shade of gold and orange and red represented in the changing leaves and late blooms. "I understand now," she said, settling beside him. "The garden is a teacher. It shows us how mind works. What we tend grows. What we ignore withers. And the quality of our attention matters more than almost anything else." Ren smiled. "Yes, the garden teaches freely to anyone willing to observe. And the teaching applies not just to plants, but to everything. Your thoughts, your emotions, your relationships, your work. All of it responds to the quality of attention you bring. A breeze moved through the garden, and May watched the flowers sway. Not fighting the wind, just moving with it. Returning to stillness when the wind passed. This too was teaching. This flexibility, this capacity to bend without breaking, this trust in natural cycles. "Thank you," she said quietly. "The teaching is not mine," Ren replied. "The garden offers it. I am only the gardener who tends it. And now you are learning to tend your own garden, both the one with plants and the one within your mind." The story of Ren's garden points to something central in Buddhist practice. The understanding that mind is like soil. What you plant in it determines what grows. This is not metaphor. It is direct observation of how consciousness works. Every thought you give attention to becomes stronger. Every emotion you feed becomes more present. Every pattern you repeat becomes more established. This happens automatically beneath conscious awareness, which is why gardens of the mind often grow wild. Weeds take over because we are not paying attention to what we are cultivating. Ren's practice was simple. He paid attention to what he was planting, both in his physical garden and in his mind. When worry arose, he noticed it but did not water it with more attention. When presence arose, when appreciation arose, when simple enjoyment of the work arose, he allowed those to grow. This is not about forcing positivity or suppressing difficult emotions. It is about recognizing that you have some agency in what you cultivate. A thought of worry arises. That is natural. But you can choose whether to elaborate on it, build stories around it, give it more energy. Or you can simply note it and return attention to what is actually here. This is what Buddhist practice cultivates. The capacity to see clearly, to meet what is actually happening rather than meeting your thoughts about what is happening. It sounds simple, but it requires training. Because the habit of meeting life through filters of fear, judgment, and story is deeply ingrained. The garden grows whether you watch it or not. But what it grows depends on what seeds are planted, what weeds are removed, what care is given. Your mind is the same. It is always active, always generating experience. But the quality of that experience depends on what you cultivate. Joy can be cultivated, not manufactured or forced, but cultivated. By giving attention to what brings aliveness, by noticing small beauties, by appreciating what works rather than fixating on what does not. This is not denial of difficulty. It is balance. Making sure that the whole garden is seen, not just the struggling sections. Ren's garden thrived in harsh conditions because he gave it what it needed without adding the burden of his worry. Your inner life can do the same. Not by eliminating challenges, but by meeting them without the extra weight of anxiety about them. Just clear seeing. Just appropriate response. Just this moment's care for this moment's need. In the foothills where autumn painted the maple trees in shades of crimson and gold, there lived a monk named Kenzo. His small temple sat at the edge of a farming village, a simple structure of weathered wood and stone that had sheltered monks for generations. Kenzo was known among the villagers not for grand sermons or elaborate ceremonies, but for the quiet way he moved through life, as if he carried some understanding that made even ordinary moments feel sacred. That particular autumn had been difficult for everyone. The summer rains had come late and then too heavy. Some crops had withered in the drought. Others had drowned in the floods that followed. The harvest was thin. Families who usually had plenty now worried about the coming winter. A heaviness had settled over the village, visible in the way people walked with their heads down, their shoulders curved inward, as if trying to make themselves smaller. Kenzo felt this collective sorrow. He saw it in the faces at the market, heard it in the shortened conversations. The village had always been a place of mutual support, of shared laughter and celebration. But hardship has a way of making people forget their own strength, forget what they carry within themselves. One morning, Kenzo decided to walk through the abandoned fields beyond the village. These were old lands, left fallow for years, where wildflowers now grew among the remnants of ancient furrows. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. His feet moved through the tall grass, and his mind was quiet, simply present with the cool air and the sound of birds beginning their morning songs. He was not looking for anything. This is important to understand. He was simply walking, simply being. But sometimes, when we are most present and least seeking, life offers us exactly what is needed. His foot caught on something beneath the grass. Not a rock, the resistance felt different. He knelt down, parting the vegetation with his hands. The earth there was soft, and as he brushed away the soil, something gleamed in the early light. Metal. Gold. His heart quickened slightly, not with greed, but with curiosity. He dug carefully, working the object free from the earth that had held it for who knows how long. It was a chest, small enough to hold in both hands, but surprisingly heavy. The metal was tarnished in places, bright in others where his digging had cleaned it. Simple designs were etched into its surface, patterns of waves and clouds that reminded him of the eternal flow of life. Kenzo sat back on his heels, holding the chest. For a moment, he simply looked at it, feeling its weight, its solidity. Then, with steady hands, he opened the latch. The lid creaked as it lifted. Inside, catching and multiplying the morning light, was gold. Not coins exactly, but small pieces, nuggets and fragments that filled the chest nearly to its brim. Mixed among them were gemstones, smooth river stones that had been polished until they shone like colored glass. Amber, jade, quartz. Each one different. Each one catching the light in its own way. Kenzo closed the lid slowly. He sat there in the field for a long time, the chest resting in his lap, his mind moving through layers of understanding. He thought about the villagers, about their forgotten strength, about how hardship can make us believe we are empty when we have never been anything but full. A teaching was taking shape in his mind, not in words yet, but as a feeling, a knowing. The chest was not just gold and stones. It was a mirror, a way to show people what they had stopped seeing in themselves. He carried the chest back to his temple. In the days that followed, he prepared. He cleaned the small ceremonial hall, a room usually reserved for meditation and occasional gatherings. He arranged cushions in a circle. He gathered pine branches and placed them in the corners, their sharp, clean scent filling the space. He lit candles along the walls, their flames steady in the still air. Then he walked through the village, stopping at each home, each shop, each gathering place. He spoke simply to each person he met. There would be a gathering at the temple in 3 days' time. Something important to share. Would they come? People agreed, mostly out of respect for Kenzo, though their eyes held questions. What could the monk possibly have that would matter now, when the harvest was small and winter was coming? On the evening of the gathering, as the sun began to set and the air grew cool, people made their way up the path to the temple. They came in small groups, families walking together, neighbors meeting on the path and continuing side by side. By the time the last light was fading from the sky, the ceremonial hall was full. People sat shoulder to shoulder on the cushions, their faces lit by candlelight, waiting. Kenzo stood before them, the small chest resting on a table covered in simple cloth. He let the silence settle first, let people arrive fully in their bodies in this moment. Then he spoke. "I want to tell you about something I found," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the stillness of the hall, every word was clear. "I was walking in the old fields, the ones beyond the village, and I discovered this chest buried in the earth." He placed his hands on the chest, but did not yet open it. "Before I show you what is inside, I want to ask you something. When times are hard, as they are now, what do you see when you look at yourselves? What do you believe about who you are?" The question hung in the air. People shifted on their cushions. A few looked down at their hands. No one spoke, but Kenzo could feel the answer in the room. They saw lack, insufficiency, the feeling of not being enough to meet what life was asking of them. "This chest," Kenzo continued, "has been in the earth for a long time. Maybe generations, maybe longer. Hidden, forgotten. But it was there all along, waiting to be discovered." He paused, his eyes moving slowly across the faces before him. "Just as something precious has been waiting in each of you, hidden beneath worry and doubt, but never absent, never gone." He opened the chest. The candlelight caught the gold and gemstones inside, and the hall filled with a soft, golden glow. People leaned forward, their eyes widening. Some gasped. Others simply stared. "This treasure," Kenzo said, "is not just mine because I found it. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to this village. But more than that, it is a symbol, a reminder." He reached into the chest and brought out a handful of the gemstones, letting them catch the light. "Each of you carries something like this inside. Talents you have forgotten. Wisdom you do not acknowledge. Strength you do not see. Kindness you offer without noticing its value." He began to move through the room, stopping before each person. To an old woman who had raised 6 children alone after her husband died young, he offered an amber stone, warm and honey-colored. "For your endurance," he said quietly, placing it in her weathered palm. To a young man who worked 2 jobs to support his aging parents, he gave a piece of dark jade. "For your devotion." To a mother who tended not just her own children but any child who needed a meal or a kind word, he offered clear quartz. "For your generous heart." One by one, he moved through the room. Each person received a stone, and with it, a recognition of something specific they carried, something valuable they had stopped seeing in themselves. Some people's eyes filled with tears. Others held their stones and stared at them in wonder, as if seeing themselves clearly for the first time in months. When everyone had received a stone, Kenzo returned to the front of the hall. "Carry these with you," he said. "Not because they are valuable as objects, but because they are reminders. When you feel empty or insufficient, hold your stone. Remember that you are the field where treasure has always been buried. You are the chest that holds what is precious. You always have been. The gathering ended quietly. People filed out into the night, but something had shifted. They walked differently, held themselves differently. In the days and weeks that followed, the village began to change. Not the external circumstances, those remained challenging. But the way people met those circumstances transformed. They helped each other more freely, shared what they had without the fear that there would not be enough, remembered their own capacity, their own worth. And Kenzo, watching this transformation, understood something the Buddha had taught long ago, that all beings possess intrinsic worth, that this worth is not created by achievement or destroyed by failure. It simply is, like the treasure in the field, waiting to be recognized. The teaching in this story touches something central to Buddhist understanding. The recognition that your worth is not something you must earn or prove. It exists independent of your circumstances, your achievements, your failures. This is not mere philosophy. It is a truth about the nature of what you are. Think about how much energy we spend trying to become worthy, trying to be good enough, successful enough, kind enough, wise enough. We treat worth as a destination, something we might reach if we just work hard enough, improve enough, fix enough of our flaws. But this is like Kenzo's villagers believing they were empty because times were hard. The hardship did not create their emptiness. Their emptiness was an illusion, a forgetting of what they had always carried. Buddhism teaches that you are already whole, already complete. Not in the sense that you cannot grow or learn or change, but in the sense that your fundamental nature, your Buddha nature, as it is sometimes called, is not lacking anything. It is not waiting to be perfected. It is perfect in its essence, even while your human life unfolds with all its messiness and challenge. Kenzo did not create worth in the villagers by giving them stones. He revealed what was already there. He held up a mirror. And in that reflection, people remembered something they had forgotten. This is what good teaching does. It does not add to you. It removes the obscurations that prevent you from seeing what you already are. When you touch this understanding, even briefly, something relaxes. The constant striving to prove yourself, to earn your place, to justify your existence. All of that can soften. Not because you become passive or stop engaging with life, but because you engage from a different place, from knowing rather than from fear, from fullness rather than from lack. This is the treasure in the field, not something you must seek or create, something you must simply remember again and again each time you forget. There was a village nestled in a wide valley between two ranges of green hills. A stream ran through the center of this valley, clear and cold, fed by mountain springs. The land was fertile. The people were hard-working. But for all their effort, for all their longing, something felt out of reach. The villagers would stand at the edge of the valley and look across to the far hillside where wildflowers bloomed and old-growth forest climbed toward the peaks. That side of the valley felt different somehow, full of possibility, as if the life they wanted was over there, just out of reach, separated by the distance they could see but could not easily cross. A monk named Renzo noticed this. He had come to the valley some years before, drawn by its beauty and quiet. He had built a small meditation hut on the near side of the valley, and he spent his days in practice and in observation. He watched the villagers at their work, at their rest, in their conversations at the market and the well. What he noticed was a kind of yearning, a belief that fulfillment was somewhere else. Somewhere they were not. The farmers wanted to be merchants. The merchants wanted to be scholars. The scholars wanted to be farmers. Everyone seemed to be gazing across some inner valley, convinced that the life they wanted was on the other side of a distance they could not cross. One evening, as Renzo sat outside his hut, watching the sun set over the far hillside, an idea came to him. Not a thought exactly, but a vision. He saw a bridge. Not a small footbridge, but a real structure, something substantial and beautiful, spanning the valley from one side to the other. A bridge that would connect where people were with where they believed they wanted to be. But more than that, he saw what the bridge could represent. The way positive thinking could span the distance between present reality and desired future. The way intention, backed by action, could make possible what seemed impossible. The vision filled him with energy, with purpose. He smiled in the fading light, already imagining the structure taking shape. The next morning, Renzo walked into the village and began talking with people about his idea. Most thought he was being impractical. Build a bridge across the valley. The distance was significant. The work would be enormous. They were farmers and merchants and craftspeople, not engineers or builders. But Renzo was patient. He did not argue or insist. He simply kept talking about the bridge as if it already existed. He described how it would look, how it would feel to walk across it. He spoke about the connection it would create, the way it would transform their relationship with the valley and with possibility itself. Something in his certainty was infectious. One person began to listen differently. Then another. A farmer who was skilled with wood said he could source timber. A merchant who had traveled widely said he had seen bridges in other places and could sketch some designs. A woman who organized the village festivals said she could coordinate work schedules so people could contribute without neglecting their own responsibilities. What had seemed impossible began to feel possible. Not easy, but possible. And in Buddhist understanding, this shift in perception is where transformation begins. Not in changing external reality, but in changing how we hold that reality in our minds. The work began. Every morning, before the heat of the day, people would gather at the valley's edge. They cleared ground for the bridge's foundation. They cut and shaped timber. They dug post holes deep into the earth. The work was hard. Some days, progress was so small it seemed invisible. But Renzo was always there, working alongside everyone else, his presence a steady reminder that the bridge was not just possible, but inevitable, as long as they continued to move toward it. Months passed. The bridge began to take shape. Posts became supports. Supports received crossbeams. Crossbeams became a deck. And then, one day, Renzo suggested something unusual. He proposed covering the bridge's railings with thin sheets of hammered brass that would catch the sunlight and glow like gold. Some people thought this was excessive. The bridge would be functional without it. Why add something decorative? But Renzo explained that the gold was not just decoration. It was a symbol. A reminder that this bridge had been built not just with hands and timber, but with a different way of thinking, with belief in possibility, with the understanding that intention, properly held and acted upon, could manifest in physical form. So they added the brass. They polished it until it shone. And on a bright morning in early summer, the bridge was complete. The first person to walk across was an elderly man who had lived in the village his entire life. He had been one of the most skeptical when Renzo first proposed the bridge. But he walked slowly across the span, his hand running along the golden railing, his face transformed by wonder. When he reached the other side, he turned and looked back at the village, at the people gathered at the bridge's entrance, and he began to laugh. Not mockery, but joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Others followed. People walked across in groups, in families, alone. Some walked slowly, savoring every step. Others ran, delighted by the solidity beneath their feet. And as they crossed, something shifted in how they saw themselves and their lives. The bridge had not changed their circumstances. The farmers were still farmers. The merchants still merchants. But the feeling of separation, of yearning for something out of reach, had dissolved. They had built something impossible. They had spanned a distance that had seemed too great. And if they could do this, what else might be possible? Renzo stood at the center of the bridge one evening, watching the sun set between the hills. People passed him, greeting him warmly. The bridge had become a natural part of village life, used daily, loved, maintained with care. A young woman stopped beside him. "Master Renzo," she said, "thank you for this bridge. It has changed everything." Renzo shook his head gently. "I did not build this bridge. We all did. But more importantly, the real bridge was never this one." He tapped the brass railing. "The real bridge is the one you built in your minds when you began to believe that the impossible was possible. That is the bridge that connects dreams to reality. That bridge you will carry with you wherever you go." The woman looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. She nodded slowly, then continued across the span, her steps lighter than before. This story reveals something essential about the nature of positive thinking in Buddhist practice. It is not about denying difficulty or pretending that challenges do not exist. It is about understanding that how we hold something in our mind shapes what becomes possible. The valley was always the same width. The distance did not change. But when the villagers' thinking changed, when they began to hold the bridge as possible rather than impossible, the physical reality eventually followed. This is not magic. This is how human endeavor works. What we believe shapes what we attempt. What we attempt shapes what we achieve. Buddhism teaches that mind is primary. That everything we experience is filtered through, shaped by, and in some sense created by consciousness. This does not mean the external world is an illusion. It means that our relationship with the external world is profoundly influenced by the quality of our thinking. Renzo understood this. He did not just propose a bridge. He held a vision so clearly that others could begin to see it too. And once they could see it, once they could imagine it as real, the work of making it real became not just possible but almost inevitable. When you believe something is impossible, you do not even begin. The impossibility is self-fulfilling. But when you hold something as possible, when you let yourself imagine it clearly, something in you begins to move toward it. not with grasping or desperate striving, but with natural, aligned effort. Not because life becomes easy or challenges disappear, but because you meet those challenges with a different quality of mind, with creativity rather than resignation, with possibility rather than limitation, with the understanding that the distance between where you are and where you want to be may be great, but it is not unbridgeable. This is the teaching Renzo offered. Not just a physical structure, but a way of holding life itself. And that way of holding, that quality of thinking, that is the real bridge. The one that, once built in your mind, you carry with you always. In a region where granite cliffs rose steep from pine forests, where winter lasted long and the wind carried the smell of snow even in summer, there was a cave known throughout the surrounding villages. It opened in the side of a mountain like a great mouth, dark and forbidding. The locals called it Yami Ana, the dark hollow, and they avoided it. Stories had built up around the cave over generations. Some said it was endless, a tunnel into the heart of the mountain with no way through. Others claimed it was home to spirits that confused travelers, leading them in circles until they were lost forever. A few insisted that anyone who entered came out changed, touched by something they could not name. Whatever the truth, the cave had a reputation that kept most people away. A monk named Ishin lived in a small hermitage not far from the cave's entrance. He was in his later years, his beard streaked with grey, his body still strong but marked by decades of simple living. He had chosen this remote place specifically because of the cave. Not despite its reputation, but because of it. Ishin understood something about darkness that most people did not. That what we fear often holds what we most need to learn. That avoiding the difficult places means avoiding the places where real understanding lives. He had been observing the cave for months, studying its entrance, considering what it might teach. One autumn morning, cold and clear, Ishin decided the time had come. He prepared simply. A small candle made of beeswax, the kind that burns slow and steady. Flint and steel to relight it if needed. A walking stick. Nothing else. He did not need provisions because he did not plan to be inside long. This was not an expedition into the depths. It was a teaching, and teachings do not require elaborate preparation. He stood at the cave's mouth as the sun climbed higher, warming the rocks around the entrance. The darkness inside was absolute. Not the darkness of a moonless night where your eyes eventually adjust. This was deeper, the kind of darkness that exists where light has never reached. Ishin lit his candle. The small flame seemed fragile against all that darkness, a tiny point of warmth and light that could be extinguished by the slightest wind. He cupped his hand around it protectively and stepped forward into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. The air smelled of stone and earth and deep time. His footsteps echoed softly. The circle of light from his candle reached perhaps 6 feet in any direction, creating a small sphere of visibility that moved with him. Beyond that sphere, darkness absolute. He walked slowly, placing each foot carefully on the uneven floor. The path sloped downward, not steeply, but noticeably. The walls narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing strangely in the enclosed space. What struck Ishin most was how the darkness pressed in. It was not passive, not merely the absence of light. It felt present, attentive, waiting. His candle flame became the center of his world. Everything depended on that small point of brightness. He walked for what might have been 20 minutes or an hour. Time felt different in the cave, stretched and compressed simultaneously. The path twisted, turned, branched. He kept to what seemed like the main passage, leaving the smaller side tunnels unexplored. Then, without warning, his foot caught on a stone. He stumbled forward, catching himself against the wall with his free hand. But the candle, he could not protect it. The flame guttered, flickered, and went out. Darkness swallowed him completely. Not gradual darkness, but instant and total. Ishin could not see his hand in front of his face, could not see the walls he knew were close, could not see anything at all. For a moment, pure instinct rose. The body's ancient fear of darkness, of being unable to see threats, of being vulnerable and exposed. His breathing quickened. His heart beat faster. The cave suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner, the weight of the mountain above him pressing down. But Ishin was not an ordinary person stumbling into an unexpected situation. He was a monk who had spent decades training his mind. So even as the fear rose, he recognized it, named it. Fear. The body's response to perceived danger. He stood still, let his breathing slow, felt his feet solid on the stone floor, felt the wall under his palm. These sensations were real. The darkness had not changed anything except his ability to see. The cave was exactly as it had been a moment before. He was exactly where he had been. Nothing had actually changed except the presence of light. This understanding settled into him, and with it, something loosened. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it lost its grip. He could feel it without being controlled by it. He reached into his robe for the flint and steel. In the darkness, this simple task became a meditation. Finding the objects by touch, positioning them correctly, striking them together. Once, twice, 3 times. Small sparks flared and died. On the 4th strike, a spark caught on the candle's wick. The flame grew. Light returned. But something had changed. Ishin looked at the candle flame differently now. Before, it had been a tool, a practical source of light. Now it felt like a teacher. It showed him something about the relationship between light and dark, between fear and understanding, between what is actually happening and what we believe is happening. The darkness had not been a threat. It had been neutral, just an absence of light. But his mind had added layers of interpretation. Fear, danger, threat. All of that had come from him, not from the darkness itself. He continued walking. The candle lit his way. But now he paid attention differently. Not just to what the light revealed, but to what the darkness taught. That it was not his enemy. That it simply was, neither good nor bad, waiting patiently for light to move through it. After some time, the passage began to slope upward. The air changed, carrying a hint of freshness. And then, in the distance, he saw something other than candlelight. Natural light. Faint, but unmistakable. The cave had another opening. He followed the light and emerged on the far side of the mountain. A hidden valley opened before him, small and sheltered, with a stream running clear and cold over smooth stones. Wildflowers grew in the meadow grass. The sun felt warm after the cave's chill. Ishin stood at this unexpected opening and understood. The cave was not an ending. It was a passage. The darkness was not a barrier, but a path. And the fear that arose in that darkness was not truth, but interpretation. All of this, the cave had taught him in the time it took to walk from one opening to another. He spent a few hours in the valley, resting, eating some wild berries he found growing near the stream. Then he walked back through the cave, this time from the valley side to his hermitage side. The journey was easier, knowing where it led, knowing the cave was passable. But the real teaching was not about the cave's geography. It was about the nature of difficulty itself, about how we meet moments when we cannot see clearly, about the difference between actual danger and the fear our minds create around situations we do not understand. In the days that followed, word spread about Ishin's journey through Yamiana. People asked him about it. Was the cave as dangerous as the stories claimed? Were there really spirits inside? Ishin would smile gently. The cave is just a cave. Stone and darkness and the occasional dripping water. The only spirits I encountered were the ones I brought with me. The fears and interpretations that arose in my own mind. Those were real enough. But they were not the cave. They were me. But you found a way through, someone would say. You discovered the hidden valley. I discovered that darkness is only the absence of light, Ishin replied. And that even a small light is sufficient to guide you through. The valley was a gift, yes. But the real discovery was understanding that what seems like an ending is often a passage to something new. This story touches something fundamental in Zen Buddhist understanding. That most of our suffering comes not from our circumstances, but from how we interpret our circumstances. The darkness in the cave was neutral. It was Ishin's mind that added fear, that created the sense of threat and danger. And when he recognized this, when he saw clearly what was actually happening versus what his mind was adding, the suffering lessened even though the circumstances remained the same. Zen teaches that reality itself is neither good nor bad. It simply is. A cave is a cave. Darkness is the absence of light. These are just facts, just the way things are. But humans have a habit of layering interpretation onto bare facts. We tell stories about what things mean. We project our fears and hopes onto neutral situations. And then we respond to our interpretations as if they were reality itself. This creates unnecessary suffering. When Ishin's candle went out, the actual situation was simple. He was standing in a cave without light. That was all. But his mind immediately added danger, threat, being lost, being trapped. None of these interpretations were based on what was actually present. They were projections, stories about what might happen, fears about what could be. When we can see this clearly, when we can distinguish between what is actually here and what our mind is adding, a natural peace becomes possible. Not because circumstances become perfect. The cave was still dark. But because we stop fighting with reality. We stop adding extra layers of suffering to situations that are already challenging enough without our mental commentary. This is why Zen practice emphasizes direct seeing. Looking at what is actually present without filtering it through all our interpretations and stories. A sound is just a sound. A sensation is just a sensation. Darkness is just darkness. When we can experience this directly, much of what we thought was unbearable becomes simply what is happening right now. The hidden valley Ishin discovered represents what becomes available when we are willing to move through difficulty rather than avoiding it. The cave's darkness seemed like something to fear, something to avoid. But by entering it, by passing through it with awareness, Ishin found beauty and peace on the other side. This is true of many difficult experiences in life. They seem like endings, like barriers, but they can be passages to understanding we could not reach any other way. The peace that comes from this understanding is not about eliminating difficulty from life. It is about changing our relationship with difficulty, meeting it without adding unnecessary layers of fear and interpretation, seeing it clearly for what it is, and trusting that awareness, even a small flame of awareness, is sufficient to guide us through. In a mountain monastery where mist gathered in the valleys each morning and the sound of a bell marked the hours, there lived a monk named Fumio. He had been at this monastery for most of his adult life, and he was known for a particular daily practice that puzzled some of the younger monks. Each morning, before the first meditation session, Fumio would go to the stream that ran behind the monastery. There, he would use a simple ceramic cup to scoop water from the flowing current. Not a large cup, just an ordinary vessel that monks used for tea, glazed in pale green with a few simple brush strokes suggesting bamboo leaves. He would return to his room with this cup of water and place it on a small shelf near the window where morning light could reach it. Then he would sit on his cushion and simply look at the cup. Not in meditation exactly, though his posture was meditative. Not in prayer, though there was something reverent in his attention. He would simply observe the cup of water for a period of time that varied from a few minutes to half an hour. A young monk named Haruki had noticed this practice and was curious about it. He had asked other monks if they knew what Fumio was doing, but no one could explain it. Finally, Haruki gathered his courage and approached Fumio directly one afternoon when they were both working in the garden, pulling weeds from between the vegetables. "Fumio-san," Haruki began carefully, using the respectful form of address. "I hope you do not mind my asking, but I have noticed your morning practice with the cup of water. What is it you are observing?" Fumio continued his work for a moment, gently loosening the soil around a young plant. Then he sat back on his heels and smiled. "Ah, you have been watching. That is good. Attention is the beginning of understanding." He pulled another weed, examining its roots before adding it to the pile. "What I observe is perspective itself. Come tomorrow morning and I will show you." The next morning, Haruki rose early and found Fumio at the stream, filling his cup. Together they walked back to Fumio's small room. The older monk placed the cup on its shelf and gestured for Haruki to sit beside him. "Look at the cup," Fumio said quietly. "Tell me what you see." Haruki looked. "I see a cup. It is filled with water. About halfway, I would say." "Halfway," Fumio repeated. "So you see it as half full?" Haruki considered this. "Well, yes. Or half empty, depending on how you think about it." "Exactly," Fumio said, and there was something in his voice, a note of deeper meaning. "The cup has not changed. The amount of water has not changed. But already we have two different ways of seeing the same thing. Half full, half empty. Two perspectives. Two different experiences of the identical reality." He let this sit between them for a moment. The morning light was growing stronger, catching the water's surface, making it shimmer slightly. "When I fill the cup," Fumio continued, "I fill it halfway intentionally. Not because I am measuring precisely, but because I want to see both the water and the empty space above it. Both are there. Both are real. But which one do we give our attention to? Which one do we decide matters?" Haruki looked at the cup with new interest. He had thought it was just water in a cup. Now he was beginning to see it as something else. A teaching. A mirror. Most people, Fumio said, go through their entire lives looking at half-full cups and seeing only what is missing. They focus on the empty space. They think about what is not there rather than what is there. This habit of mind creates a kind of poverty that has nothing to do with actual circumstance. He shifted his weight on his cushion, settling more deeply. "I had a friend once, a man who lived in the village below. He had a beautiful home, a loving family, work that provided well for his needs. But he was always unhappy because his neighbor had a larger home. The neighbor's success seemed to diminish his own. He would look at his life and see only what he lacked compared to others." "What happened to him?" Haruki asked. "He spent his whole life feeling poor despite being rich in all the ways that actually matter. He never learned to see the fullness of his cup. He died an unhappy man, surrounded by blessings he never acknowledged." Fumio turned his attention back to the cup. "This is why I sit with this practice each morning. To train my mind to see the fullness as well as the emptiness. To recognize that both are present, and I have some choice about which one I emphasize." Over the following weeks, Haruki began joining Fumio for the morning practice. At first, it seemed simple to the point of being silly. Sitting and staring at a cup of water. What could this possibly teach? But gradually, Haruki began to notice things. Some mornings, he would look at the cup and his eyes would go immediately to the empty space, to what was not there. Other mornings, he would see the water first, clear and pure, catching the light. The cup itself never changed, but his perception of it shifted based on his state of mind. This was the teaching revealing itself. His mood, his worries, his hopes, all of these colored how he saw the cup. When he was feeling grateful and content, he saw fullness. When he was anxious or comparing himself to others, he saw emptiness. The cup became a mirror for his own mental state. One morning, after sitting with the cup for some time in silence, Haruki spoke. "I am beginning to understand. It is not really about the cup at all." Fumio smiled. "No, it is about the mind that observes the cup. About recognizing that we are always choosing where to place our attention, whether we realize it or not. And that choice shapes our entire experience of life." He picked up the cup, holding it carefully in both hands. Some people think positive thinking means lying to yourself. Pretending the empty space is not there. But that is not what this practice teaches. The empty space is there. It is real. I am not denying it or pretending it does not exist. He turned the cup, watching how the water moved. What I'm learning is to give equal attention to what is present. To see the whole picture, not just the part my habitual mind wants to focus on. And I am discovering that when I do this, when I truly see both the fullness and the emptiness, something shifts. Life becomes more balanced, more complete, more real. Haruki found that this practice began affecting how he saw everything. When he worked in the garden, he could choose to focus on the weeds that always grew back, or on the vegetables that thrived with care. Both were true. When he sat in meditation, he could focus on how restless his mind was, or on the moments of stillness that appeared between thoughts. Both existed. Life itself was like the half-full cup, always containing both presence and absence, fullness and emptiness, achievement and falling short. The question was not how to make the cup completely full. That was impossible. The question was how to hold the reality of the partially filled cup without letting the empty space define the whole experience. Months later, a group of visitors came to the monastery, seekers looking for teachings on finding peace and contentment. The abbot asked several monks to share their practices, and Fumio was among them. He sat before the group with his ceramic cup, filled halfway with clear water. "This is my teacher," he said, holding it up so everyone could see. "Every morning it shows me the most important teaching. That reality contains both fullness and emptiness. That I have some choice about where I direct my attention. And that this choice matters more than almost any external circumstance." A woman in the group spoke up. "But what if your life really is mostly empty? What if there is legitimate lack, real problems, actual difficulty?" Fumio nodded. "Yes, this happens. Life can be truly difficult. There can be real loss, real hardship, real pain. I am not suggesting we deny this or pretend it is not happening." He looked at the cup in his hands. "But even in the hardest circumstances, there is usually some water in the cup. Maybe very little. Maybe just a few drops. But something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When we are in real difficulty, those few drops become even more important. Not because they eliminate the emptiness, but because they remind us that we are not completely without resources. There is still something to work with, even if it is small." The practice is not about creating false optimism. It is about seeing accurately. Seeing all of what is present, including the small things we might otherwise overlook because we are so focused on what is absent. This complete seeing, this is what creates the possibility of genuine peace. The teaching of the half-full cup goes deep into Zen understanding. In Zen, we talk about seeing things as they are, without the distortions our preferences and aversions create. This is harder than it sounds because the mind is constantly evaluating, judging, comparing. Constantly telling stories about whether what is present is good enough or lacking. The cup with water halfway up is a perfect mirror for human life. We are never completely empty and never completely full. There is always presence and absence existing together. Always some things going well and other things needing attention. Always both gifts and challenges. This is not a problem to solve. This is simply the nature of being alive. But the mind wants to make it a problem. It wants to focus on what is missing and make that mean something about our worth or our life's value. Or sometimes it goes the other direction, trying to focus only on the positive and denying any difficulty. Both approaches are distortions. Both miss the complete picture. Zen practice cultivates what might be called accurate seeing. Looking at the cup and seeing both the water and the space above it without making either one more important than the other. Both are there. Both are part of the reality of this moment. When we can hold both with equal attention, something balances in us. This balanced seeing naturally leads to peace. Not because circumstances become perfect, but because we stop fighting with reality. We stop demanding that the cup be completely full before we can appreciate the water that is present. We stop letting the empty space define our entire experience. The peace that comes from this is stable in a way that peace dependent on circumstances can never be. Because circumstances always change. Sometimes the cup is more full, sometimes less full. But when our peace comes from how we hold whatever is present, rather than from the specific amount present, that peace can persist through changing conditions. Fumio's daily practice was training in perspective, training the mind to see completely rather than selectively. This is what all Zen practice does in different ways. It trains us to be present with what actually is, rather than lost in our thoughts about what should be. When you look at your own life as a cup, what do you see? Are you seeing only the empty space? Only what is lacking or wrong or needing improvement? Or can you also see the water, the gifts and strengths and beauties that are already present? Both are there. Both are real. The question is where your attention habitually goes. This is not about forcing yourself to think positively or pretending problems do not exist. It is about widening your view to include the whole picture, about training your mind to notice what is present with the same energy you give to noticing what is absent. This simple shift in attention can change everything. The cup sits on the shelf, unchanged by our perception of it. But our experience of the cup, our experience of our life, our experience of this moment, all of this is profoundly shaped by where we place our attention. And that placement, that choice of focus, this is something we can learn to direct with awareness rather than letting it be controlled by habit. In a region where mountains rose in layers, each ridge visible beyond the last like waves frozen in stone, there grew a tree unlike any other in the forest. It was a cryptomeria, what some call Japanese cedar, and it had been growing for perhaps 300 years. Its trunk was massive, requiring several people linking hands to encircle it. The lowest branches began far above the ground, thick as a man's body, reaching out and up toward the sky. A monk named Osamu had discovered this tree during one of his long walking meditations through the forest. He was not attached to any particular monastery, but moved through the region, staying in hermitages and small temples, teaching when asked, mostly keeping to himself. When he found the great tree, something in him recognized it immediately. Not as just a tree, but as a possibility. He began visiting it regularly. Each time he would climb up into its branches, moving carefully but confidently. The bark was rough under his hands, providing good grip. The branches were sturdy, layered in ways that created natural platforms and perches. And high up, perhaps 40 feet from the ground, there was a place where several large branches met, forming a kind of bowl or cradle in the tree's architecture. Osamu began to see what could be built there. Not a house exactly, but a nest, a refuge, a place suspended between earth and sky where he could rest and practice, held by the tree's ancient strength. He started gathering materials, fallen branches from the forest floor, straight and strong, vines that could be woven and tied, moss and leaves for cushioning. He carried these up into the tree, climb after careful climb, building his collection in the cradle of branches. The work took weeks. He would spend hours in the tree each day, weaving branches together, creating a platform first, then building up walls of woven twigs and vines. The structure had to be strong enough to support his weight, flexible enough to move with the tree in the wind, and sheltered enough to provide some protection from weather. People from the nearest village noticed his project. They would see him climbing the tree, see the structure taking shape high in the branches. Some thought he was mad. Why would a monk build a nest like a bird? What purpose could it serve? Others were simply curious, watching his progress with interest. One day, a farmer named Ichiro called up to him from the base of the tree. "Master Osamu, why do you build so high? Would not a simple shelter on the ground be easier and safer?" Osamu paused in his work and looked down through the branches. Ichiro seemed very small from this height. "Easier, yes," Osamu called back. "Safer, perhaps. But this is not about ease or safety. This is about creating something that reflects what I value. A place of perspective and peace." He climbed down to talk with Ichiro more easily. They sat at the base of the great tree, and Osamu explained, "When I am up there, everything looks different. The problems that seem so large on the ground become smaller when seen from above. The worries that press close lose some of their weight when there is distance and perspective." "But you could gain perspective by climbing a mountain," Ichiro said. "Why build in the tree?" "Because this is not just about the view," Osamu replied. "It is about creating a place that is wholly mine. A space I have built with my own hands, shaped by my own choices, reflecting what matters to me. Every branch I weave into it represents a decision. Every vine I tie represents intention. I am not just finding a place of peace. I am creating it." Over the following weeks, the nest took shape. It was perhaps 6 feet across, with woven walls rising a few feet high on the sides most exposed to wind. The floor was layered with moss and soft leaves. There was space to sit, to lie down, to move around slightly. Branches overhead provided some shelter from rain, though the nest would never be completely dry in a storm. That was part of its nature. When it was finished, Osamu began spending more time there. He would climb up in the early morning and sit in meditation as the sun rose. The tree would sway gently in the wind, and the nest would move with it, a rocking motion that was strangely soothing. He could hear the forest below and around him. Birds would come close, curious about this unusual nest with its unusual occupant. The perspective from the nest changed how Osamu saw things. The village in the distance looked peaceful, the individual houses and people part of a larger whole. The mountains beyond seemed closer, more present. The sky was not just above, but around him, infinite and changing. But more than the physical perspective, there was something about being in the nest that created inner space as well. Up there, held by the tree, separate from the ground and its constant demands, Osamu found he could think more clearly. The usual noise of the mind quieted. Questions that had seemed complicated became simpler. Decisions that had felt heavy became lighter. One afternoon, a young monk named Takara came looking for Osamu. She had heard about the tree nest and wanted to understand it. She called up to him, and he invited her to climb. She made her way up carefully, testing each branch before putting her weight on it. When she finally pulled herself into the nest, she was breathing hard from the climb, and her eyes were wide with wonder. "This is remarkable," she said, looking around at the woven walls, at the forest spreading below, at the sky so close above. They sat together in silence for a while. The tree swayed gently. A breeze moved through the upper branches. Takara felt something in her relax that she had not realized was tense. "Why did you build this?" she asked finally. Osamu considered the question. "I built it because I needed to create my own paradise. Not to escape the world, but to have a place where I could return to myself, where I could remember what matters beneath all the things that seem to matter." "Is that not what monasteries are for?" Takara asked. "Monasteries serve that purpose for many people," Osamu agreed. "But I needed something more personal. Something I shaped with my own hands and my own vision. This nest is not just a physical structure. It is an expression of my understanding that peace is something we create, not something we find. It is something we build, branch by branch, choice by choice, until we have made a space where our deepest self can rest." Takara looked at the woven branches around her, touched one of the vines tied into the structure. "So each of us needs to build our own nest? Our own place of peace?" "Not literally," Osamu said, "though some might. But yes, in the deeper sense. Each person must create the conditions for their own peace, must make the choices, set the boundaries, cultivate the practices that allow their inner life to thrive. No one else can do this for you. Teachers can point the way. Practices can provide tools. But the actual building, the actual creating of your personal refuge, this is work only you can do." Takara stayed in the nest for several hours. When she finally climbed down, she felt changed. Not dramatically, but in some subtle way. She had seen that peace was not just something to seek in monasteries or sacred places. It was something that could be created anywhere, in any way that reflected one's deepest values. Osamu continued living partly in his nest and partly on the ground. He would spend nights up there when weather permitted, sleeping under the stars, waking with the birds. The nest became known in the region, and occasionally other seekers would come to see it, to climb up and sit for a while in that suspended space between earth and sky. Each person who visited came away with their own understanding. Some saw it as a lesson about creativity and determination. Others saw it as a teaching about the importance of having a refuge. But what Osamu hoped people would see was simpler and more profound. That peace is not a destination to reach, but a space to create. That each of us has the capacity to build our own refuge, whether physical or mental or spiritual. That the work of creating this space is itself a practice, a way of shaping our lives according to what we most deeply value. The nest in the tree speaks to something important about how we create the conditions for our own well-being. In Zen practice, there is often talk about finding peace, as if peace were something that exists somewhere waiting to be discovered. But what if peace is not found but made? What if it is something we construct through our choices, our practices, our attention to what matters? Osamu's nest was physical, visible, something you could climb into and touch. But each of us builds invisible nests all the time. The habits we cultivate become structures that support us or fail to support us. The thoughts we habitually think create the atmosphere of our inner life. The boundaries we set determine what we allow in and what we keep out. All of this is nest building. All of this is creating refuge. Many people wait for the right conditions to create peace in their lives. They think they will find peace when circumstances improve, when problems are solved, when life becomes easier. But this approach gives all the power to circumstances. It makes peace dependent on things outside your control. What Osamu understood is different. Peace becomes possible when you create the conditions for it, regardless of external circumstances. This does not mean ignoring difficulties or pretending challenges do not exist. It means building something sturdy enough to hold you while you face those difficulties. Creating space where you can return to center, to clarity, to what matters beneath all the noise. The height of the nest also taught something. Perspective changes things. When you can step back from the immediate press of daily concerns, when you can see your life from a different vantage point, problems often look different. Not smaller necessarily, but in proportion. Part of creating refuge is creating this capacity for perspective, for seeing your life as a whole rather than being lost in whatever moment is pressing on you. In a coastal town where fishing boats left at dawn and returned with the evening tide, where the smell of salt was always in the air and gulls cried overhead, there lived a monk named Shiro. He had no temple, no monastery affiliation. He supported himself by mending nets for the fishermen, work that required patience and steady hands. In exchange for this work, the fisherman made sure he always had enough to eat and a dry place to sleep. Shiro had a small boat, barely large enough for one person, with a simple sail and a pair of oars. It was old but sound, well maintained, despite its age. Most days, when the weather was calm and his net mending work was done, Shiro would take the boat out onto the lake that stretched beyond the town's harbor. The lake was large, more like a small inland sea, fed by mountain streams and rivers. Its waters were usually calm, though storms could arise suddenly when conditions were right. Most of the fishermen worked the lake near the shore where fish were plentiful and the way back was short. But Shiro liked to row out farther, to where the town became small in the distance and the water opened wide in all directions. A young man named Daisuke had noticed Shiro's daily journeys. Daisuke was the son of one of the fishermen, learning the trade but not yet skilled enough to go out alone. He was curious about the monk who rowed out each day into the open water, seemingly for no practical purpose. No nets. No lines. Just rowing out and sitting on the water for hours before returning. One day, Daisuke approached Shiro at the dock as the monk was preparing his boat. "Master Shiro, may I ask you a question?" Shiro looked up from checking his sail and smiled. "Of course. Why do you go out on the water each day? You are not fishing. You are not going anywhere specific. What is it you do out there?" Shiro secured the sail and sat on the edge of his boat, gesturing for Daisuke to sit beside him. "I go out to practice," he said simply. "Practice what?" "Navigating. But not in the way your father teaches you. I am learning to navigate life itself, and the lake is my teacher." Daisuke looked confused. Shiro laughed gently. "Come with me tomorrow if you would like to understand. The lake explains better than I can." The next morning, Daisuke met Shiro at the dock just after sunrise. The lake was calm, reflecting the soft colors of the early sky. They pushed off from shore, and Shiro showed Daisuke how to help manage the sail while he handled the rudder. The wind was gentle but steady, filling the sail and moving them slowly away from land. As the town receded behind them, Daisuke felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had been on boats many times, but always close to shore, always with a clear purpose. This felt different, more open, less certain. When they were perhaps a mile from shore, Shiro adjusted the sail to slow their movement, letting the boat drift gently with the current. "Now," he said, "we practice." "Practice what?" Daisuke asked. "The wind is like life," Shiro said. "It blows where it will. Sometimes in the direction we want to go, sometimes not. Sometimes strong, sometimes gentle, sometimes not at all. We cannot control it, but we can decide how we respond to it." He adjusted the sail slightly, and the boat turned. Adjusted it again, and they moved in a different direction. The sail is like our will, our intention. The wind provides the energy, but the sail determines how that energy moves us. When I position the sail correctly, even a wind that seems contrary can take me where I want to go. Daisuke watched as Shiro demonstrated, turning the boat in various directions by adjusting the sail's angle to the wind. The wind had not changed, but their direction changed constantly based on how Shiro held the sail. "But what if the wind stops?" Daisuke asked. "What if there is no wind at all?" Shiro picked up one of the oars. "Then we row. Different energy, different method, but we still move. We do not wait for perfect conditions. We work with what is present." They spent the morning on the water. Shiro taught Daisuke how to read the wind, how to feel the boat responding to the water, how to adjust constantly to changing conditions. It was not about forcing the boat to go where you wanted regardless of circumstances. It was about being responsive, flexible, always working with what was actually present rather than wishing for something different. As the sun climbed higher, the wind picked up slightly. Small waves formed on the lake's surface. The boat moved faster, and Daisuke could feel the power of the wind in the sail, the resistance of the water against the hull. "Notice," Shiro said, "how the wind that makes some people complain is the same wind that moves us forward. The difference is not in the wind. It is in how we position ourselves relative to it." He let Daisuke take the rudder, coaching him on how to feel the boat's movement, how to anticipate changes, how to respond smoothly rather than overcorrecting. At first, Daisuke was uncertain, gripping the rudder too tightly, making jerky adjustments. But gradually, as he relaxed, he began to feel the boat as an extension of himself, began to sense the wind's changes before they fully arrived. "This is what I mean by navigation," Shiro said. "Not just steering a boat, but learning to move through conditions as they are. To meet what comes with flexibility rather than rigidity. To use even unfavorable conditions to move in the direction that matters." They had drifted a good distance from where they started. Shiro pointed toward shore. "Now, let us return. But notice, we are not going directly back. The wind is coming from that direction. So we will angle, tacking back and forth, using the very wind that blocks a direct path to eventually arrive where we want to be." Daisuke had seen fishermen do this countless times, but had never understood the deeper principle. You could not always move in a straight line to your destination. Sometimes you had to angle, to move in a direction that seemed wrong, to work with the conditions rather than fighting against them. And yet, through this indirect path, you eventually arrived. They made their way back to the harbor, and as Daisuke helped secure the boat, his mind was turning over everything he had experienced. It was not just about sailing. It was about life. About meeting circumstances with flexibility. About using what is present rather than complaining about what is absent. about trust that you can navigate through anything if you remain responsive and clear. "Thank you," he said to Shiro. "I thought I was learning to sail, but I learned something much larger." Shiro smiled. "The lake teaches what we are ready to learn. Come out with me again when you wish. There is always more to discover." In the weeks that followed, Daisuke joined Shiro on the water regularly. Each time, the conditions were different. Sometimes the wind was strong, sometimes gentle, sometimes absent. Sometimes the water was choppy, sometimes smooth. But through all these varying conditions, Shiro demonstrated the same quality: presence, responsiveness, a kind of optimism that was not naive cheerfulness, but deep trust in his capacity to work with whatever arose. One day, clouds began gathering while they were far from shore. The wind picked up quickly, and the water turned grey and rough. Daisuke felt fear rise in him. They were too far out. The storm was coming too fast. They should not have come today. But Shiro was calm. "We adjust," he said simply. He brought the sail down partially, reducing the wind's force on it. He positioned the boat to take the waves at an angle rather than head-on. He rowed when the wind was too chaotic to use. And, slowly, steadily, they made their way back towards shore. When they reached the harbor, Daisuke was shaking, more from the intensity of the experience than from cold. But Shiro was steady, securing the boat with his usual care. "I was afraid," Daisuke admitted. "Fear is natural when conditions become challenging," Shiro said. But notice, the fear did not help us navigate. Presence helped. Clear seeing of what was needed helped. Trust that we could meet each moment as it arose, that helped. The fear was just fear. We acknowledged it and then did what needed doing. Daisuke understood then why Shiro went out every day. It was not about the sailing itself. It was about practicing this quality of meeting life, of working with conditions as they are, of maintaining presence and trust through changing circumstances. The lake was a teacher, and each day's conditions provided a different lesson in navigation. What Shiro teaches on the water applies to everything in life. We all face changing conditions, favorable and unfavorable, often beyond our control. The question is not how to make all conditions favorable. That is impossible. The question is how to navigate skillfully through whatever conditions arise. In Zen understanding, optimism is not about expecting everything to go well. It is about trust in your capacity to respond to whatever comes. This trust is built through practice, through repeatedly meeting difficulty and discovering that you can work with it, that you have resources you did not know you possessed. The sail and the wind create a relationship. The wind provides energy, the sail directs it. In life, circumstances provide energy, and your response directs how that energy moves through your experience. A difficult situation can break one person and strengthen another. Not because the situation is different, but because the response is different. Shiro's flexibility on the water shows something essential. When the wind changes, he adjusts the sail. He does not waste energy complaining that the wind should blow from a different direction. He does not remain rigid, insisting that the sail stay in one position regardless of conditions. He moves with what is present. This is not passive acceptance. This is active responsiveness. Many people approach life with fixed ideas about how things should be. When reality does not match these ideas, they suffer. They fight against what is happening, wishing it were different, angry that circumstances are not as they prefer. All this fighting creates suffering without changing the circumstances. It is like keeping the sail in one position while the wind shifts, wondering why you are not moving in the direction you want. What if instead you could be like Shiro, noticing when conditions change, adjusting your response, working with what is actually present rather than what you wish were present? This does not mean you have no preferences or make no effort to improve conditions. It means you do not add the extra layer of resistance and complaint to whatever challenges you are already facing. The indirect path back to shore when the wind blocks the direct route speaks to patience and trust. Sometimes you cannot move straight toward what you want. Sometimes you have to angle, to take a path that seems to go in the wrong direction, to move in ways that do not make immediate sense. But if you trust the process, if you keep adjusting and responding skillfully, you discover that even the indirect path leads home. Shiro's calmness in the storm came from practice. He had been on the water in many conditions. He knew from experience that he could navigate through difficulty. This knowledge was not theoretical. It was earned through repeatedly meeting challenges and discovering his capacity to respond. This is how trust develops in life. Not by avoiding difficulty, but by meeting it and discovering that you can. Each time you navigate through something hard, you build trust in yourself. Each time you adjust and respond skillfully rather than panicking or giving up, you strengthen the quality of presence that Shiro demonstrated. The lake teaches because it is always changing and always itself. The water, the wind, the weather, all in constant flux. You cannot step into the same lake twice. Each day's conditions are new. And yet, the principles of navigation remain consistent. Presence, flexibility, working with what is present, trust in your capacity to respond. Your life is like this lake, always changing, always presenting new conditions, and the practice is the same. Not controlling the wind, not demanding that the water be different, but learning to position your sail, your intention, your response in ways that allow you to navigate skillfully through whatever arises. In a city where streets wound between workshops and market stalls, where the clang of metalwork mixed with the calls of vendors and the constant hum of conversation, there stood a temple. Most people passed it without noticing. It was small, tucked between larger buildings, its entrance marked only by a simple wooden gate. But those who found it called it Shizukaji, the Temple of Stillness. A monk named Hideo was traveling through the region, moving from place to place, as was his practice. He believed that staying still for too long could make a monk's understanding rigid, disconnected from the flowing reality of the world. So he walked, he observed, he taught when asked, and he kept moving. He arrived in this particular city on a market day when the streets were especially crowded. The noise was overwhelming. Vendors shouting their prices, customers haggling, children running and calling to each other, animals making their various sounds, carts rattling over cobblestones. The sensory assault was constant, pressing in from all directions. Hideo felt his usual calm beginning to fray. He was tired from traveling. His body wanted rest. But more than that, his mind wanted quiet. He needed a place to settle, to breathe, to find his center again. As he moved through the market, dodging people and carts, he noticed something. An elderly woman standing still amid all the movement, her face peaceful despite the chaos around her. Their eyes met, and she smiled slightly. Then she gestured with her head toward a narrow alley between buildings. Hideo followed her indication and found himself in front of the small temple gate. He could still hear the market, but the sound was slightly muffled here. He pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The change was immediate. Not that the noise stopped. He could still hear everything from the street. The vendors, the conversations, the general commotion of city life. But something about the temple grounds absorbed the noise differently. The space felt separate without being isolated. Present but peaceful. The courtyard was simple. Stone pathways. A few carefully tended plants. A small building with sliding doors that stood partially open. Hideo removed his sandals and stepped inside. The interior was spare. Wooden floors worn smooth by generations of feet. White walls without decoration. A few meditation cushions arranged in rows. And in the corner, a small altar with a single candle burning. That was all. Hideo chose a cushion and Saturday. He closed his eyes and began to settle into meditation. At first, his mind was as chaotic as the street outside. Thoughts jumping from one thing to another. Reactions to sounds. Plans for where he would go next. Memories of the day's walking. The usual mental noise that fills the space of consciousness. But gradually, as he continued sitting, something shifted. The noise outside did not change. The city continued being a city. But his relationship with the noise changed. It became like background music. Present but not demanding attention. There but not disturbing. He sat for perhaps an hour, maybe longer. Time felt different in the temple. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt renewed. Not because the world had become quiet, but because he had found quiet within himself despite the world's noise. A monk emerged from a back room. He was older, his face deeply lined, his movements slow but precise. He looked at Hideo and nodded slightly in greeting. "The temple serves its purpose," the old monk said, as if continuing a conversation they had been having. "It does," Hideo agreed. "Though I confess I am curious how such stillness exists in the middle of such noise." The old monk smiled. "The stillness is not in the temple. The temple is just walls and floors and roof. The stillness is in those who enter. The temple only provides space for people to remember what they already carry." He moved to sit on another cushion, settling with the ease of long practice. When people first come here, they expect the temple to block out the city, to create silence by eliminating sound. But this is not what happens. The city remains. The sound continues. What changes is the relationship between the person and the sound. Hideo understood. He had experienced exactly this. "You are teaching that peace is not dependent on external conditions." "I am not teaching anything," the old monk said gently. "The temple teaches. I only tend it. But yes, this is what people discover here. That the peace they seek is not found by eliminating all disturbance. It is found by changing how they hold disturbance. By creating an inner temple, a space of stillness that exists regardless of what is happening around them." They sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, the market continued its noisy business. Inside, there was space for that noise and space around it, both existing together without conflict. Hideo stayed at the temple for 3 days. Each day, he would sit in meditation while the city moved around him. And each day, he went deeper into understanding what the temple offered. It was not escape. It was perspective. It was the discovery that stillness and noise could coexist, that you did not need perfect conditions to find peace. You needed only to remember that peace lived inside you, in a place no external noise could reach. On the morning of the 4th day, as he prepared to continue his journey, he thanked the old monk. "Where will you go next?" the old monk asked. "To other cities, other temples, other teachers," Hideo said. "Then carry this temple with you," the old monk said, touching his chest over his heart. "It is here now, built not of wood and stone, but of understanding. No matter how loud the world becomes, you can return to this inner temple and find stillness waiting." Hideo bowed deeply. He understood. The temple had given him something he could not lose, a knowing that peace was not something external he needed to seek out. It was something internal he could access in any moment, in any condition, simply by remembering. He walked back into the noisy street. The market was in full swing. But now the noise did not disturb him. It was just sound, just life happening. And beneath it, within him, the temple of stillness remained, always accessible, always offering refuge. Years later, Hideo found himself teaching students in a different city. One of them, a woman named Akane, was struggling with her meditation practice. "I cannot find peace," she said. "My mind is too loud. My life is too busy. I need to go somewhere quiet, somewhere I can really practice." Hideo smiled, remembering the temple of stillness. "Let me tell you about a place I once visited," he said. And he shared the story of Shizuka-ji, of the old monk, of the discovery that stillness is not found by eliminating noise, but by recognizing the place within where noise cannot reach. "So I should build a temple?" Akane asked, confused. "You should recognize the temple that already exists," Hideo replied. "Right here." He touched his chest. "The world will always be noisy. Life will always be busy. But you carry stillness with you everywhere you go. The practice is not creating perfect conditions. The practice is remembering this inner temple and learning to rest there even when the world is loud." This teaching about the inner temple points to something essential in Zen understanding. We spend so much time trying to arrange external conditions to support our peace, seeking quiet places, eliminating disturbances, creating perfect environments for meditation or reflection. And while these efforts can be helpful, they also create a dependency. They suggest that peace requires certain conditions and cannot exist without them. But what if peace is not dependent on conditions? What if it is something that exists within you regardless of what is happening around you? This is not just philosophical speculation. It is something you can discover directly through practice. The old monk at Shizukaji understood that the temple's purpose was not to eliminate sound, but to provide space for people to discover their own inner stillness. The walls did not block out the city. They created a boundary that said, Here is a place where you can remember what you already carry. When Hideo first entered the temple, his mind was as chaotic as the street outside. The difference was not in the external noise level, but in his relationship with noise. As he sat in meditation, he learned to let the sounds be sounds, not problems to solve, not disturbances to eliminate, just sounds happening, like weather happening, like life happening. This is the practice. Not fighting with what is present. Not demanding that the world be quiet before you can find peace. But discovering that peace exists in a different dimension than noise. That they can coexist. That stillness can hold sound without being disturbed by it. Think about how much energy goes into trying to control your environment. Making sure things are just right. Eliminating this disturbance and that one. Managing conditions so you can finally relax, finally feel at peace. But conditions are always changing. There is always another disturbance. Another thing that is not quite right. If peace depends on perfect conditions, peace will always be just out of reach. The inner temple that Hideo discovered is not a place you create. It is a place you recognize. It has always been there, this stillness within you. But it gets forgotten beneath the noise of thoughts, the chaos of emotions, the constant activity of daily life. The practice is remembering, returning, resting in this place that is always available. When you sit in meditation and thoughts arise, you are practicing this. The thoughts are noise. Mental noise instead of auditory noise, but noise nonetheless. And the practice is not eliminating thoughts, but recognizing that you are the awareness in which thoughts arise. That awareness is like the temple. It holds the noise without being disturbed by it. It provides space for everything that arises. This understanding creates a different kind of stability. Not the fragile stability that depends on conditions remaining favorable, but a deeper stability that persists through changing conditions. The market can be loud or quiet. Your mind can be busy or calm. And beneath it all, the inner temple remains, offering refuge whenever you remember to return to it. On the edge of the same coastal region where Shiro sailed his small boat, where the lake stretched wide and the mountains rose beyond, there was a stretch of rocky shore that most people avoided. The rocks were sharp and difficult to walk on. The water was deep close to shore, dropping away suddenly, offering no gradual entry. But a monk named Reiko was drawn to this place precisely because others avoided it. Reiko had been practicing meditation for many years. She understood the teachings intellectually. She could explain Buddhist concepts clearly to students. But lately, she had felt something missing. A depth that her understanding had not yet reached. A place beneath the surface that she could sense, but not access. She began coming to the rocky shore each morning before dawn. She would sit on a large flat rock near the water's edge and watch the lake as the sun rose. The water was different every day. Sometimes perfectly calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Sometimes choppy with small waves. Sometimes moving in larger swells when the wind was strong. What Reiko noticed was that no matter what the surface looked like, there was a depth beneath that remained unchanged. When the water was choppy, it was only the surface that moved. A few feet down, the water was calmer. Deeper still, it was completely still, unaffected by whatever weather moved across the surface. This observation became a teaching, a way of understanding something about consciousness itself. One morning, as she sat watching the water, a fisherman named Takeshi came walking along the shore. He was older, someone who had spent his entire life on and near the water. He noticed Reiko sitting on her rock and paused. "You come here often," he said. Not a question, just an observation. "Every morning," Reiko replied. "The lake teaches me." Takeshi looked interested. "What does it teach?" "Come, sit for a moment and I will show you," Reiko said. The fisherman settled onto a nearby rock. Together, they watched the water. The sun was rising now, casting golden light across the surface. Small waves caught the light, creating patterns that moved and shifted constantly. "What do you see?" Reiko asked. "I see the lake. The waves. The morning light," Takeshi said. "Look more carefully," Reiko suggested. "Look at the surface and imagine what lies beneath." Takeshi was quiet, really observing now. After a moment, he said, "The surface moves constantly. Changes every second. But deeper down, the water must be calmer. And at the very bottom, it must be completely still." "Yes," Reiko said. "Exactly. The lake has layers. The surface responds to every wind, every passing weather system. But the depths are untouched by all of that. They remain still regardless of what happens above." She picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. It created ripples that spread outward in widening circles. When something disturbs the surface, the whole surface responds. But watch closely. The ripples fade quickly, and they never reach very deep. A few feet down, it is as if the stone never fell. Takeshi nodded slowly, beginning to understand that she was not just talking about the lake. "Our minds are like this," Reiko continued. "Most of us live on the surface. Our attention is caught by every passing disturbance. Every thought that arises creates ripples. Every emotion creates waves. And we identify with these surface movements. We think we are the waves, the ripples, the constant change. But there is a depth beneath," Takeshi said, understanding dawning. "There is always depth beneath," Reiko confirmed. "A place in consciousness that is not disturbed by surface movements. A stillness that persists regardless of what passes through the mind. Most people never discover this depth because they never look beneath the surface. They spend their entire lives riding the waves, never realizing that they could dive deeper and find stillness." They sat in silence for a while. The lake continued its constant movement, surface dancing with light, depths remaining dark and still. "How do you reach this depth?" Takeshi asked finally. "You do not reach it. You recognize it," Reiko said. "It is not somewhere else. It is here, now, beneath all the surface activity of your thoughts and feelings. The practice is learning to rest your attention there instead of only on the surface." She closed her eyes. "When I sit in meditation, thoughts arise. They are like waves on the surface. At first, I would get caught in them, follow them, identify with them. But gradually, I learned to let thoughts be thoughts. To see them arising and passing like waves while I rest deeper down in the place that is not disturbed by thoughts." Takeshi tried this. He closed his eyes and turned his attention inward. At first, all he noticed was mental noise. Thoughts about the day's work ahead. concerns about his boat, memories of the previous day. His attention kept getting caught in these thoughts, following them, elaborating on them. But then he remembered Reiko's image of the lake, the surface and the depth. He tried to let thoughts be surface movements while he placed his attention deeper. It was not easy. His attention kept rising back to the surface, getting caught in passing thoughts. But occasionally, for brief moments, he touched something else. A quietness that was there beneath the thinking. A stillness that was aware of thoughts, but not made of thoughts. When he opened his eyes, the lake looked different. Or rather, he was seeing it differently. The waves on the surface were real, but they were not the whole truth of the lake. Beneath them, in depths he could not see but knew were there, the water was still and dark and unmoved by any wind. "I felt it," he said quietly. "Just for moments. But I felt something beneath the noise of my thoughts. Something quiet." Reiko smiled. "That is the beginning. That recognition. Now the practice is learning to rest there more consistently. To remember that you are not only the surface, but also the depth. Not only the waves, but also the stillness beneath the waves." Over the following weeks, Takeshi began sitting with Reiko on the rocks. He was no monk, had no interest in formal practice or study. But he had discovered something in that brief moment of touching the depth, and he wanted to understand it more fully. Reiko taught him simply. Not through complicated philosophy, but through direct observation of the lake, direct exploration of his own consciousness. When his mind was busy with thoughts, she would remind him, "These are surface waves. Let them move. Your attention can rest deeper." When emotions arose, strong feelings of worry or happiness or frustration, she would say, "These too are surface movements. Real, but not the deepest truth of what you are. Beneath the emotions, the stillness remains." Gradually, Takeshi discovered what Reiko had found. That peace was not about having a calm surface. Some days the mind was busy, emotions were strong, life was challenging. But beneath it all, there was a place of stillness that could be accessed even when the surface was choppy. This depth was always there, always available, always peaceful. One morning, after they had been sitting together for some months, Takeshi said, "I used to think peace meant having no problems. No worries. No difficulties. Just smooth sailing, as we say on the boats." He looked at the lake. The surface was quite rough that morning, the wind creating whitecaps. "But now I understand differently. Peace is not about the surface being calm. It is about knowing the depth beneath the surface. The depth that is always still, always quiet, no matter what weather passes overhead." Reiko nodded. "Yes, this is the teaching of the lake, and it is the teaching of Zen, that your true nature is like the depth, not disturbed by passing phenomena, not changed by the waves of thought and emotion, just still, just aware, just here." They sat together as the sun climbed higher. The wind continued. The waves continued. And beneath it all, the stillness continued, deep and dark and permanent, the true nature of the lake and of consciousness itself. What the lake teaches Reiko and Takeshi is something profound about the nature of awareness. Most of the time, we identify with surface movements, with thoughts and emotions and sensations. These are constantly changing, constantly responding to conditions. And when we think we are only these surface movements, we feel unstable, tossed around by circumstances, never quite finding solid ground. But in Zen understanding, you are not only the surface. You are also the depth. There is a dimension of consciousness that simply observes, that is aware of all the passing phenomena without being made of any of it. This awareness is like the deep water. It is not disturbed by the waves above. It does not change based on conditions. It simply is, constant and still and always present. This is not a belief or a philosophy. It is something you can discover directly. When you sit in meditation and watch thoughts arising, there is something in you that watches. That observing awareness is not a thought. It is what knows thoughts. It is deeper than thinking. When you feel an emotion, there is something that feels the emotion. That feeling awareness is not the emotion itself. It is what holds the emotion, what makes space for it. And that awareness does not change based on whether the emotion is pleasant or unpleasant. It is simply present, like the depth of the lake, holding whatever arises at the surface. Most people spend their lives on the surface. This is natural. The surface is where life happens, where things are interesting and engaging. But living only on the surface means being tossed around by every passing wave, never finding stability, never discovering the peace that exists beneath. The practice is learning to rest in the depth while still engaging with the surface. You do not have to eliminate thoughts or emotions or experiences. You do not have to make the surface calm. You simply recognize that there is more to you than the surface. That your true nature includes this depth, this stillness, this awareness that is never disturbed. When you can touch this depth, even briefly, something fundamental shifts. You realize that you are not as fragile as you thought, that the waves cannot actually harm you, that no matter what arises at the surface, you remain whole and complete and undisturbed in the depths of your being. This is why Reiko kept returning to the lake. Not because the lake gave her peace, but because it reflected back to her what she was discovering about her own nature. The waves and the depth coexisting. Movement and stillness as two aspects of the same reality. All of it held in one wholeness. Takeshi's realization that peace is not about having a calm surface captures something essential. We wait for the waves to stop. Wait for our thoughts to quiet. Wait for our emotions to settle. Wait for life to become smooth. And we believe that when all this happens, then we will finally find peace. But peace is available now, beneath the waves that are already present. It does not require perfect conditions. It does not require the surface to be different than it is. It only requires recognition of the depth that already exists, that has always existed, that will always exist regardless of what passes across the surface. This understanding brings a natural calm. Not the forced calm of suppressing experience or avoiding difficulty, but the natural calm that comes from knowing yourself more completely, from recognizing that you are spacious enough to hold all your experiences without being overwhelmed by any of them, from touching the place within that no weather can disturb. The lake will always have waves. Your life will always have challenges. Your mind will always generate thoughts. Your heart will always feel emotions. This is the nature of being alive, being human, existing in the world. But beneath it all, the stillness waits. the depth remains. And when you learn to rest there, you discover a peace that does not depend on anything changing. As the night deepens around you now, as these stories and teachings settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, let yourself rest like the depth of the lake. All the thoughts and concerns of your day are like surface waves, real, but not the deepest truth of what you are. You have journeyed through these teachings tonight. Through gardens and mountains, through caves and across water, through all the ways that Buddhist wisdom reveals itself in simple moments and profound insights. Each story was a reminder of something you already know, something your deepest self has always understood. That peace is not something to achieve, but something to remember. That your worth is not something to prove, but something to recognize. That difficulties are not obstacles to your peace, but opportunities to discover what you truly are beneath all the changing conditions of life. Let your body grow heavier now. Let your breath deepen and slow. There is nowhere you need to go. Nothing you need to understand or remember or hold on to. These teachings will work in you whether you consciously think about them or not. They will settle into the depths of your being like seeds in fertile soil, growing in their own time, in their own way. You are like the lake. Surface and depth together. Movement and stillness as one. And in this moment, you can rest in the depths, where all is quiet, where all is well, where peace has been waiting for you all along.